We went to school to learn things like reading, writing, and arithmetic. We were taught the Pythagorean theorem, but not how to calm ourselves down when we're having a panic attack. Our schools taught us algebra, but never how to express our hurt feelings. And so in life, too often we find ourselves feeling stressed out, anxious, or just plain misunderstood. We know something's wrong, but we can't explain it. We're desperate to connect with other people, but we don't know how. So we suffer in silence. We fake a smile and we say everything's fine when it really isn't. So what happened? Where did we go wrong? Well, it turns out that what we were missing was an essential part of the curriculum, our emotional curriculum. In this video, we'll explore why schools don't teach kids about emotions, what that means for us as adults, and finally, what we can do to make up for it. Let's start by asking ourselves, how much attention does our school give to emotional skills? How many lessons are dedicated to learning about emotions? Are there any? What about grades? Do we get graded on our emotional skills? Can we fail an empathy exam or get an A in a self-awareness test? The honest answer is no. Our school systems have failed to prioritize teaching emotional skills. And this might be surprising, because if we look at the list of subjects most schools teach, they seem to cover almost every aspect of human knowledge except emotions. Reading, writing, and math help us communicate and problem solve. Science teaches us about the world around us, and history helps us understand where we came from. But nowhere on the list is anything about understanding your emotions. Which is strange, because emotions are a big part of what makes us human. They influence how we think, how we act, and how we interact with others. If our goal in school is to prepare students for real life, then shouldn't we teach them how to deal with their emotions and those of others? After all, how many of us got through school without experiencing jealousy, anger, sadness, or anxiety? The truth is, we've all experienced these emotions. Ignoring them in school doesn't make them go away. It just means that when students leave school, they're ill-equipped to deal with them. But we're not alone in thinking this way. There are plenty of teachers and administrators who have been advocating for decades to include emotional learning in the curriculum. The good news is that these advocates are winning. More and more schools are now offering classes on emotional intelligence, which proves that there is a demand for this kind of learning. But even though emotional learning is starting to become more common in schools, it's still not widespread enough. And for those of us who didn't have the opportunity to learn about emotions in school, we're left feeling lost, confused, and sometimes even ashamed. In 1990, psychologist Peter Salovey and Daniel Goleman popularized the idea of emotional intelligence. Salovey and Goleman argued that, just like IQ or intelligence quotient, which measures our cognitive abilities, we also have an EQ or emotional quotient that measures our emotional abilities. And according to their research, our EQ is just as important as our IQ in determining our success in life. Since then, several large-scale studies have confirmed that EQ is a better predictor of success than IQ. Let's take a closer look at what the evidence says. A meta-analysis published in 2016 found that students with higher levels of emotional intelligence perform better academically than their peers. This effect was especially pronounced in students from low-income families and those with learning disabilities. Another study published in 2018 found that emotional intelligence is associated with better social and behavioral outcomes in children.
Specifically, the researchers found that children with high EQs were less likely to exhibit externalizing behaviors such as aggression
and delinquency, and were more likely to have positive social skills and academic achievement. A third study published in 2021 found that emotional intelligence is associated with better mental health outcomes. The researchers found that individuals with high levels of emotional intelligence were less likely to experience depression and anxiety and had better overall well-being. This research is important because it shows that emotional intelligence is associated with better outcomes across multiple domains. It's not just about being smarter or having a higher IQ. It's also about having the emotional skills to manage your emotions. Understand other people's emotions and use that understanding to improve your relationships and achieve your goals. When it comes to predicting success in life, IQ only tells part of the story. EQ is just as important, if not more so. The question is, why haven't we been taught these skills in school? Why has emotional intelligence been left out of the curriculum? Well, there are a few reasons. For one thing, IQ was considered the gold standard for intelligence for much of the 20th century. As a result, schools focused on teaching students how to think rather than teaching them about their emotions. Additionally, IQ is relatively easy to measure. There are standardized tests that can accurately and reliably assess a student's cognitive abilities. EQ, on the other hand, is much more difficult to measure. There are some standardized tests that have been developed, but they aren't as accurate or reliable as the ones used to measure IQ. Finally, teaching emotional skills requires trained teachers. It's not enough to just hand over a textbook to a classroom of students and expect them to learn about their emotions. They need a teacher who can guide them through the process and help them develop the necessary skills. Unfortunately, there aren't enough teachers who have the training and expertise to do this effectively. As a result, emotional intelligence has been left out of the curriculum, leaving many students ill-equipped to deal with their emotions and those of others. The good news is that we don't have to accept this situation. We can take steps to make up for the gaps in our education and learn the emotional skills we need to thrive. So, what are the essential emotional skills we need to learn? Well, here are two to get you started. The first skill is to name your feelings before they control you. Emotions are powerful. They can influence our thoughts, behaviors, and relationships. When we're feeling angry, we might lash out at others. When we're feeling sad, we might withdraw socially. And when we're feeling anxious, we might avoid the things that make us feel nervous. But when we take the time to identify our emotions, we can choose how to respond to them rather than reacting impulsively. By naming our emotions, we can take a step back and consider how we want to act. For example, if we're feeling angry, we can remind ourselves that anger is a normal emotion and that it's okay to feel angry. But we can also remind ourselves that lashing out will only make things worse. Instead, we can take some deep breaths, count to 10, and then calmly express our anger. In other words, we can choose to respond rather than react. The second skill is to replace "I'm fine" with specific emotional descriptions. When someone asks us how we are, we often automatically respond, "I'm fine." But this response doesn't really tell the other person anything about how we're feeling, and it doesn't allow them to show empathy or support. Instead, we can be more specific and say something like, "I'm feeling a little overwhelmed right now," or "I'm feeling grateful for your support." By being specific, we give the other person valuable information about how we're feeling and what we need. We also show them that we're open and honest in our communication, which builds trust and strengthens relationships. These are just two of the many emotional skills we can learn. If you want to learn more, we encourage you to read books on emotional intelligence, attend workshops, or see a therapist. It takes practice to develop these skills, but the payoff is worth it. By learning how to understand and manage our emotions, we can lead happier, more fulfilling lives. We can also pass these skills on to the next generation by teaching them to our children and supporting them as they learn and grow. The bottom line is that emotional intelligence is an essential part of the curriculum that schools have neglected for far too long. We can't afford to let another generation of students go through school without learning these important skills. It's time to build the emotional curriculum that schools have forgotten. Thanks for watching. See you next time.
Subscribe.